The handcuffs were cold against my wrists. 23 years old, sitting in the back of a police car, watching my grandfather's company disappear behind tinted windows. $250 million. Gone. Just like that. My name is Marcus, and 3 months ago I thought I had won the lottery of life. My grandfather, Theodore Blackwood, had built Blackwood Industries from nothing. 50 years of sweat, genius, and relentless ambition. Steel manufacturing, real estate, tech investments. The empire sprawled across 3 states. The old man was dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months. He called me to his study on a Tuesday evening in March. The room smelled like leather and old tobacco, walls lined with awards and photographs spanning decades of success. He was smaller than I remembered. The disease had carved away pieces of the mountain of a man I'd grown up respecting, fearing, loving, but his eyes still burned with that familiar intensity. "Marcus," he said, his voice a whisper of what it used to be. "I'm leaving you everything." The words hit me like lightning. I'd expected maybe a trust fund, enough to get by. Not this, not the whole empire. "Grandpa, I don't understand. What about Mom? What about Richard?" Richard, my stepfather, the man who'd married my mother when I was 12 and had spent the last 11 years trying to prove he belonged in our family's orbit. He'd worked his way up to CFO of Blackwood Industries through a combination of charm, competence, and strategic positioning next to my mother's bed. "Your mother will be taken care of," Grandpa said. "But Richard, no. This company is blood, Marcus. It stays in the blood." He pulled out a leather portfolio thick with legal documents. The will, transfer papers, stock certificates. My hands shook as I held them. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a small metal box, about the size of a shoebox, with an intricate combination lock. "When the time comes, when you need it most, this will protect everything we've built. The combination is your grandmother's birthday. Hide it. Trust no one with it. Not even your mother." I should have listened to that last part. The funeral was a spectacle. 500 people, including senators, CEOs, and half the city's elite. I stood at the graveside in my black suit, the weight of inheritance heavy on my shoulders. Richard stood beside my mother, his hand on her back, his eyes scanning the crowd with calculated precision. The lawyers read the will the next day. I'll never forget the look on Richard's face when they announced that controlling interest in Blackwood Industries was mine. 68%, absolute control. His jaw tightened, but he smiled and shook my hand. "Congratulations, son," he said. The word son felt like a blade between my ribs. For 2 weeks, I was the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I moved into Grandpa's corner office, still filled with his cigars and certificates. The transition felt surreal, like wearing clothes that were too big. Richard was helpful those first days, too helpful. He scheduled meetings, introduced me to key executives, walked me through complex financial reports. I was grateful for the guidance. I was also naive. The first red flag came when I noticed money moving between accounts. Large amounts. 7-figure transfers happening after hours, buried in routine operational reports. When I asked Richard about them, his explanation was smooth as silk. "Year-end restructuring," he said. "Your grandfather approved these before he passed. I'm just executing his final wishes." But something felt wrong. The transfers were going to subsidiaries I'd never heard of, companies with generic names like Highland Holdings and Meridian Consulting. When I tried to access the files on these entities, my computer access was denied. I called our head of IT. "Marcus, those files are restricted per senior management directive," he said. "I'd need CFO approval to grant access." CFO approval. Richard's approval. The pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to see. I hired a private investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in corporate fraud. What she found made my blood freeze. Highland Holdings was registered to a shell company in Delaware. The sole owner, Richard's brother-in-law. Meridian Consulting was even more brazen. It was Richard's own company, created 3 years ago, funneling money out of Blackwood Industries through fake consulting contracts. "He's been bleeding the company dry," Sarah told me, spreading documents across her desk. "Conservative estimate? He's stolen about $40 million over 3 years. $40 million. My grandfather's legacy, siphoned away by a man we trusted." I confronted him on a Thursday morning, walked into his office with printouts of every fraudulent transaction, every fake contract, every stolen dollar. We need to talk, I said, closing the door. Richard looked up from his computer, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes, something that had probably been there all along. Of course, Marcus. What's on your mind? I slammed the papers down on his desk. 40 million, Richard. $40 million. He didn't even flinch. He picked up one of the documents, scanned it casually, then set it down. You're making a serious accusation, he said. I'm stating a fact. You've been stealing from this company for 3 years. From my grandfather, from me. That's when Richard smiled. Not the warm paternal smile I'd grown used to. This was something else entirely. Stealing, he said, standing up slowly. That's an interesting word choice. From my perspective, I've been protecting this company from a 23-year-old boy who has no idea what he's inherited. The office felt smaller suddenly, darker. I know exactly what I've inherited, I said, and I know what you've stolen. Stolen, he repeated, walking around his desk. Let me tell you what I know, Marcus. I know that your grandfather was losing his mind in his final months. Paranoid. Making erratic decisions. I know that he signed documents transferring significant assets to various holding companies to protect them from potential litigation. Those holding companies belong to you. They belong to family. And last I checked, I am family. The word hung in the air between us like poison gas. You're not blood, I said. And there it was, the moment the pretense died completely. Richard's face went cold. Blood? He said. Your grandfather was obsessed with blood. But blood doesn't run companies, Marcus. Experience does. Intelligence does. And frankly, you have neither. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and dangerous. You're fired. He laughed. Actually laughed. You can't fire me, son. Check your paperwork more carefully next time. My heart started hammering. What are you talking about? The transfer documents you signed when you inherited the company. Did you read them carefully? Every page? Every clause? The blood drained from my face. I had signed dozens of documents that day. The lawyers had explained the major points, but the fine print, there had been so much fine print. Page 47, Richard said, sitting back down at his desk. Subsection 12. Any changes to senior management require a 2/3 vote from the board of directors. I control 4 of the 7 board members, Marcus. Simple math. The room spun around me. You planned this. I've been planning this for 11 years. Your grandfather never respected me, never saw my value. But I saw his weaknesses. I saw an old man who was more concerned with bloodlines than business sense. He built this company from nothing. And in his final years, he nearly destroyed it with his paranoia and his outdated thinking. This company needs leadership that understands the modern market, leadership that can make the hard decisions. Leadership like you? Exactly like me. I was losing. Everything was slipping away, and I could feel the walls closing in. The money you stole, I said. I have evidence. Evidence of legitimate business transactions approved by the board. Transactions that move vulnerable assets into protected holdings during a period of uncertainty following Theodore's death. Every word was calculated. Every excuse had been prepared in advance. I'm calling the police, I said. Go ahead. But Marcus, before you do, consider this. Your mother. Where do you think she'll stand when this becomes public? When her choice is between her son and her husband? When she has to choose between love and financial security? The knife twisted deeper. He was right, and we both knew it. My mother loved me, but she'd also grown comfortable with the lifestyle Richard provided. And she was loyal to him in ways that had always made me uneasy. I left his office feeling like I was walking through quicksand. Every step forward seemed to sink me deeper. That afternoon, I called an emergency board meeting. I presented my evidence, laid out Richard's theft in detail, and demanded his immediate termination. The vote was exactly what he'd predicted, 4-3 against me. The board has full confidence in CFO Richard Hartwell, announced board chairman William Preston, a man who'd been my grandfather's friend for 30 years but who apparently owed Richard some significant favors. I was not just outvoted, I was humiliated. But I wasn't finished. I took the evidence to the FBI. I filed a complaint with the SEC. I hired the best lawyers I could afford and prepared for war. Richard's counterattack was swift and surgical. On a Monday morning, federal agents arrived at my apartment with a warrant for my arrest. The charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. According to the government, I had been the one stealing from Blackwood Industries. I had created fake companies to funnel money into personal accounts. I had forged my grandfather's signature on transfer documents in his final weeks when his mental capacity was questionable. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing money flowing into accounts in my name, contracts bearing my signature, email communications from my computer authorizing fraudulent transactions. All of it fabricated, all of it perfectly constructed. How the hell did you do this? I asked my lawyer, David Morrison, as we sat in the county jail's consultation room. Someone with access to your personal information, your computer, your grandfather's files, he said. Someone who's been planning this for a very long time. Richard had played a longer game than I'd imagined. Every piece of evidence I thought pointed to him had been carefully constructed to point back at me. The theft had been real, but the trail led directly to Marcus Blackwood. I spent 6 weeks in jail before making bail. My mother posted the bond, crying when she saw me in the orange jumpsuit, telling me she believed in my innocence. But when I got out, she had news that shattered what was left of my world. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she said, unable to meet my eyes. "Richard and the board have voted to remove you from all positions with Blackwood Industries, pending the outcome of your trial." "Mom, you know I didn't do this." "I know you think you didn't do this, but Richard showed me the evidence, and it's very convincing." The betrayal in her voice was worse than anything Richard had done. She didn't believe me. My own mother thought I was a thief. That night, alone in my apartment, I remembered the metal box my grandfather had given me. I'd hidden it in a wall safe behind a painting in my bedroom, just as he'd instructed. My grandmother's birthday, October 15, 1948. The combination clicked and the box opened. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. Real estate deeds to properties I'd never heard of. Stock certificates for companies that didn't officially exist. Bank account numbers and access codes written in my grandfather's careful handwriting. But at the bottom of the box was something even more valuable, a letter addressed to me in my grandfather's distinctive script. "Marcus," it began, "if you're reading this, then Richard has made his move. I've known for 2 years what he was planning. The man is intelligent, patient, and completely without conscience. You are reading this because he has stolen my company and framed you for his crimes. But I planned for this possibility. The documents in this box represent the real Blackwood Industries. For 3 years, I've been quietly moving the company's most valuable assets into holdings that Richard doesn't know exist. The company he thinks he's stolen is worth about $60 million. The real value of what I built is in your hands now. Richard has the name and the offices. You have the substance. The choice of how to use it is yours." My grandfather had known. He'd seen Richard's true nature years before I had, and he'd prepared for war. The next document was a complete financial breakdown. My grandfather had moved patents, real estate holdings, stock portfolios, and technology assets into a web of trusts and corporations that existed entirely outside Blackwood Industries' official structure. The number at the bottom made me sit down hard: $420 million. Richard had stolen a shell company. The real empire was sitting in a box in my apartment. But the final document in the box was the most devastating of all. It was a confession signed by Richard's brother-in-law detailing the money laundering scheme and Richard's instructions for stealing from Blackwood Industries. It was dated 6 months before my grandfather's death. Grandpa had turned Richard's own accomplice. "Marcus," the confession read, "Richard promised me a cut of whatever he stole from the old man. But when I realized the scope of what he was planning, when I saw that he intended to frame you and destroy your life, I couldn't be part of it. Your grandfather offered me immunity in exchange for this confession and my cooperation in documenting Richard's crimes. He was a good man. He deserves better than having his legacy stolen by a snake. I had everything I needed to destroy Richard, but my grandfather's letter had one more surprise. "Don't move too quickly," it warned. "Richard is dangerous when cornered. Let him enjoy his victory for a while. Let him believe he's won completely. Then, when his guard is down, when he's made the company fully his own, reveal the truth. The fall from a greater height will be more devastating." My grandfather had planned psychological warfare. I followed his advice. For 3 months, I pretended to be a broken man. I let Richard and the world believe that Marcus Blackwood was finished. I took a job as a car salesman, living in a studio apartment, driving a 15-year-old Honda. "Richard," meanwhile, was living his dream. He'd moved into my grandfather's mansion, driving my grandfather's cars, sitting in my grandfather's office. The local business journal did a feature story on his heroic efforts to save Blackwood Industries from the criminal actions of Theodore Blackwood's reckless grandson. The trial for my embezzlement charges was set for December. My lawyer warned me that the evidence against me was strong and that I should consider a plea deal. "They're offering 7 years," he said. "With good behavior, you could be out in 4. "I'm not taking any deal," I said. "Marcus, be realistic. The jury is going to see bank records, contracts with your signature, email communications from your computer. Even if you didn't do this, proving your innocence is going to be nearly impossible." "Trust me," I said. In November, I made my move. I started with the real estate. The documents in my grandfather's box included deeds to 12 commercial properties in 3 states, all held in trusts that Richard had no knowledge of. Collectively, they generated about $8 million in annual rental income. I contacted each tenant with a certified letter announcing that their rent payments should now be directed to a new management company, Meridian Holdings, not to be confused with Richard's Meridian Consulting. The confusion was immediate and devastating. Richard's lawyers received calls from property management companies claiming that their rental income was being redirected. When they investigated, they found that the properties Richard thought were owned by Blackwood Industries had never actually belonged to the company. The patents were next. 17 manufacturing patents that represented the core of Blackwood Industries' competitive advantage. Richard had been licensing them from shell companies for 3 years without realizing it. I revoked those licenses. Blackwood Industries' production ground to a halt overnight. But the killing blow was the technology subsidiary. Richard had been so proud of the company's investment in a promising AI startup called Quantum Dynamics. The $20 million investment represented the future of Blackwood Industries. What Richard didn't know was that my grandfather had purchased Quantum Dynamics outright 6 months before his death, holding it through a trust that made it appear to be an independent investment. I fired Blackwood Industries as a client and signed an exclusive licensing deal with their biggest competitor. Richard called me on a Tuesday morning. His voice was strained, desperate. "Marcus, we need to talk." "About what?" I asked innocently. "You know about what, the properties, the patents, the quantum deal. What do you want?" "Justice," I said. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past month. His carefully styled hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Known what?" "Don't play games. How long have you known about your grandfather's backup plan?" I sipped my coffee slowly. "About 4 months." 4 months. He rubbed his face with both hands. "You let me think I'd won for 4 months." "My grandfather's advice. Let you enjoy the victory before destroying it." "What do you want, Marcus? Money? I'll split everything with you 50-50. "You don't have anything left to split. The real Blackwood Empire was never yours to begin with." That's when Richard's mask slipped completely. The desperation turned to rage. "You arrogant little bastard," he snarled. "You think you've won? I can still destroy you. Those criminal charges are real. You're still going to prison." I pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. "Page 1 is your brother-in-law's confession. Page 2 is documentation of every fraudulent transaction you've made. Page 3 is a signed statement from the FBI indicating that they've reviewed this evidence and are prepared to dismiss all charges against me in exchange for my testimony against you." Richard opened the folder with shaking hands. His face went white as he read. "Page 4, I continued, is a civil complaint I'm filing tomorrow morning seeking damages for fraud, defamation, and emotional distress. My lawyers estimate your personal assets at about $12 million. We're asking for $50 million. You can't prove emotional distress." "Actually, I can. Page 5 is a psychological evaluation documenting the trauma caused by false imprisonment and the destruction of my relationship with my mother. Page 6 is a statement from Dr. Page 6 is a statement from Dr. Page 6. Elizabeth Vance, who's prepared to testify about the long-term psychological damage caused by your systematic campaign of emotional manipulation." Richard closed the folder and stared at me across the table. "You've thought of everything," he said quietly. "My grandfather thought of everything. I'm just following his plan. What happens now?" I leaned forward. "Now you resign from Blackwood Industries. You transfer your stock holdings to me for the sum of $1. You publicly confess to your crimes and apologize to my mother for deceiving her. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow morning the FBI arrests you for wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. The civil suit proceeds, and I make sure everyone in this city knows what kind of man you really are." Richard sat in silence for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I underestimated him," he said finally. "You underestimated me too," I said. "No, you were exactly what I thought you were. A naive kid who inherited something he couldn't handle. Your grandfather, though, he was still fighting this war from the grave." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen. "Where do I sign?" The resignation was effective immediately. Richard transferred his stock holdings and resigned from the board. Within a week, I owned 78% of Blackwood Industries. The criminal charges against Richard were filed 3 days later. He pled guilty to avoid a lengthy trial and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. My mother filed for divorce before he was even sentenced. "I'm sorry," she told me the night Richard was arrested. "I should have believed you." "He was convincing," I said. "He fooled everyone." "Not everyone, not your grandfather." We were sitting in Grandpa's study, the same room where he'd handed me the metal box that saved my life. The space felt different now, smaller, somehow, but still filled with his presence. "He knew this would happen," I said. "He prepared you for it. There's a difference." She was right. My grandfather hadn't just anticipated Richard's betrayal. He'd constructed an elaborate trap that relied on Richard's own arrogance and greed to destroy him. But the victory felt hollow in some ways. I'd gotten everything back, plus interest. Blackwood Industries was stronger than ever. Richard was in prison where he belonged. Yet I'd lost something too. The naive trust I'd had in family, in people, in the basic goodness of the world. Richard had taken that from me, and no amount of money or justice could give it back. 6 months later, I was sitting in my grandfather's chair, running his company, when Sarah Chen called with an update on her investigation. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "Richard wasn't working alone." My blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "The bank records show regular payments to 3 other individuals over the past 2 years. Looks like he had inside help." "Who?" "Board members. Preston, Hawkins, and Shaw. They've been taking kickbacks to vote with Richard on key decisions." 3 more board members. 3 more traitors. I hung up and reached for the metal box, which now sat in my grandfather's old desk drawer. There were still documents inside I hadn't fully examined, papers I'd assumed were backup records. I was wrong. The final section contained detailed financial records on every board member, every senior executive, every person in a position to help or hinder Richard's plans. My grandfather had investigated everyone. And at the very back of the box was one more letter. "Marcus," it read, "by the time you read this, you've probably discovered that Richard had helpers. Men who sold their loyalty for money, who betrayed the company they swore to protect. The evidence against them is in the attached files. But remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes it's better to know your opponent's position than to capture their pieces immediately." These men showed their true nature when they thought there was profit in betrayal. Use that knowledge wisely. A man who will betray his oath once will do it again. The choice is yours. Exile them now, or keep them close and use their corruption against them when the time is right. Trust your instincts. You're a Blackwood. Blood tells. I sat back in the chair and looked out the window at the city skyline. 12 floors below, traffic moved through streets like blood through arteries. Life continuing its messy, complicated course. Preston, Hawkins, and Shaw had no idea I knew about their betrayal. They thought they'd escaped detection when Richard fell. They were probably congratulating themselves on their cleverness, assuming they could continue their corruption under new management. They were about to learn that the Blackwood family played chess on a longer board than they could imagine. I picked up the phone and called my assistant. "Set up individual meetings with board members Preston, Hawkins, and Shaw," I said, "this week, and book the conference room for a special board meeting next Friday." "Certainly, Mr. Blackwood. Shall I provide meeting agendas?" I smiled, thinking about my grandfather's letter. "No agenda necessary. We're going to discuss the future of the company. The future and the past, and the price of betrayal. Some lessons only need to be taught once."